After a grueling week at work, a movie night seemed like the perfect antidote to the stress. My partner and I had been looking forward to this, the chance to unwind in a dimly lit theater, surrounded by the smell of buttery popcorn and the comforting hum of excited chatter. We arrived early, securing ideal seats in the center of the theater, ensuring we wouldn't have to crane our necks or squint from a distance. As more moviegoers filed in, I felt a sense of anticipation. There was something comforting about the shared excitement of strangers gathering to experience a story unfold on the big screen. I settled into my seat, sipped on my soda, and let myself relax. The lights dimmed, the trailers began, and the familiar thrill of escapism set in. Just as the first trailer ended, someone slid into the empty seat beside me. It caught me off guard because the row had been empty on that side. I turned my head slightly to glance at the person. He was an unremarkable man. Average height, nondescript t-shirt, worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Yet, despite his ordinary appearance, something about him felt off. It wasn't anything overt, just a subtle sense of unease that I couldn't quite place. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe he was just another moviegoer running late. But as the movie began, I realized his behavior was anything but typical. He fidgeted constantly in his seat, shifting his weight, adjusting his cap, and occasionally tapping his fingers on the armrest. It was subtle, but enough to draw my attention. Then came the phone. He pulled it out early in the first act, the screen's glow distracting against the darkness. He swiped and tapped feverishly, muttering under his breath as though he were having a quiet conversation with himself. The sound was barely audible, but it was relentless, a low drone that gnawed at my nerves. I leaned over to whisper to my partner, "This guy's acting weird." My partner gave him a quick glance before nodding. "Just ignore him," they murmured back, though their tone suggested they were just as unsettled as I was. Before I could decide what to do, the man leaned slightly toward me. His voice was low, but his words cut through the background noise. "Do you dislike company?" he asked, his tone unnervingly calm. The question caught me so off guard that I froze, unsure of how to respond. My heart raced as I tried to process what he'd just said. Then, just as quickly, he leaned back and resumed his frenetic swiping and muttering, as though nothing had happened. I exchanged a glance with my partner, whose expression mirrored my growing unease. My instincts screamed that something wasn't right, but what could I do? Confront him? Alert an usher? For now, I decided to wait, though the pit in my stomach only deepened as the minutes ticked by. I tried to shake the unease that had settled in my chest, forcing myself to focus on the movie, but my attention kept drifting back to the man beside me. His restlessness was unnerving. He shifted in his seat, his foot tapped in an almost rhythmic pattern, and his phone screen glowed intermittently as he continued to check it obsessively. Each buzz sent a shiver down my spine, punctuating the quiet tension like a warning bell. Then I caught a glimpse of his phone screen. It was only for a fraction of a second, but the message stood out starkly in bold, white text against the dark interface. "It's time." My breath hitched. I glanced up at the man's face, trying to gauge his expression, but his cap cast a shadow that obscured his eyes. He muttered something under his breath again, the sound unintelligible, but unsettling nonetheless. And then he stood up. No warning, no excuse me. Just a sudden, jerky motion as he brushed past me and strode down the aisle. I stiffened as his arm grazed mine, the contact sending an unwelcome jolt through me. I turned to my partner, whose wide eyes mirrored my own unease. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. My partner shook their heads slowly, their gaze following the man as he disappeared into the shadows near the emergency exit. Minutes passed, but he didn't return. A part of me wanted to let it go, to convince myself that he was just odd and nothing more. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing anxiety building in my gut. Something wasn't right. That's when I noticed it, the faint glow of streetlights filtering in through the emergency exit at the far corner of the theater. The door was propped open. I nudged my partner and pointed to it. "That's not supposed to be open," I muttered, my voice low but urgent. My partner frowned, leaning in to get a better look. "Stay here. I'll go find an usher," they said, their voice firm. I didn't argue. Truthfully, I didn't want to leave my seat, as if moving might make the situation worse. As my partner made their way toward the lobby, I sat frozen, my eyes flicking between the glowing exit and the screen. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out the dialogue of the film. Every sound in the theater seemed amplified: the creak of a chair, the rustle of a jacket, the muffled cough of someone a few rows away. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as though the room itself were holding its breath. The longer I sat there, the heavier the atmosphere grew. The open door was like an ominous invitation, its presence impossible to ignore. I imagined the man slipping back in, unnoticed by the others, his motives a mystery, but undoubtedly sinister. My fingers dug into the armrests as I tried to dispel the horrifying scenarios that began forming in my mind. I told myself my partner would be back soon, but the pit in my stomach only deepened as the seconds dragged on. The seconds felt like hours as I sat there, alone with the overwhelming sense that something was about to go horribly wrong. My partner hadn't returned yet, and my eyes kept flickering between the emergency exit and the glowing screen. The prop door loomed like an omen, its slight sway from the wind outside intensifying the sense of unease. The tension in my chest grew heavier with every creak of a chair or distant murmur from the rows behind me. Then it happened. The fire alarm blared, its shrill sound tearing through the theater and sending everyone into a frenzy. People jumped up from their seats, spilling drinks and popcorn as they scrambled for the exits. I stayed frozen for a moment, my mind racing to process what was happening. My gaze darted to the open emergency door, half expecting to see the stranger reemerge, but the doorway remained empty. My partner appeared suddenly, weaving through the chaos with an usher in tow. "We need to get out," my partner urged, gripping my arm. The usher began ushering everyone toward the main exits while speaking into a walkie-talkie, their tone clipped and urgent. I grabbed my coat and followed, the deafening sound of the alarm blending with the murmur of anxious voices. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a shockwave. A crowd had gathered in the parking lot, clusters of people murmuring and glancing back at the theater. My partner stayed close to me, their hands squeezing mine in reassurance, but neither of us spoke. The fire alarm was still blaring inside, and I watched as theater staff attempted to maintain order while patrons spilled out into the lot. Minutes later, a police car pulled up, its lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out and hurried into the building, their expressions serious. The crowd fell into a tense silence, the murmurs fading as everyone watched the scene unfold. I couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was somehow behind this. But what could I say? There was nothing solid, just instincts and vague unease. Eventually, one of the officers returned, scanning the crowd before walking straight toward me. "You were inside when this happened?" he asked, his tone firm but professional. I nodded, recounting everything: the stranger's odd behavior, the cryptic message on his phone, and the propped door. As I spoke, the officer's expression shifted from neutral to concerned. He jotted notes into a small pad, asking me to describe the man in more detail. "We found the emergency door open, just as you said," the officer explained once I finished. "But there's no sign of anyone matching the description you gave. No fingerprints, no evidence left behind. Nothing." The officer's words left me rattled. The man had vanished as though he'd never been there, leaving only lingering dread in his wake. What had his intentions been? What was he planning? And why had he left so suddenly? I'd never know for sure. The only thing I could cling to was that cryptic phrase on his phone: "It's time." Time for what? That question has haunted me ever since.